This is January 25th, 2025. This is the Green Faith Circle of Circle Sanctuary. We're talking today about regenerative agriculture. The Earth's soil is her vitality, it's her fertility. People have participated in some form of agriculture, we know at least dating back to the Sumerian or pre-Egyptian times. The first forms of agriculture used crop rotations with livestock and allowing fields to lay dormant to rest and renew before asking more of them. As our populations grew due to agricultural innovations, so did the demand for more and bigger food yields until farmers no longer allowed the land to rest, but instead started adding synthetic nutrients to depleted soils in order to grow more food, which needs more pesticides because of the weakened crops that aren't strong enough to hold up to pests on their own. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. Fast forward to today, 60 to 90% of our world's soil is depleted from micronutrients and minerals that they need for it to hold water. Irrigation techniques are taxing local watersheds because the plants need more water. Go ahead and the next slide. We haven't been thinking of the soil as living, but it is a complex network of minerals, mycelia and nematodes, or micronutrients. All of these pieces construct the health of the soil. When we plant, especially monocrops, the soil becomes depleted because the crops use the same nutrients over and over again, not allowing the soil to rest and recover. We have historically reacted by feeding plants a mixture of synthetic nutrients, potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, or NPK. This mixture enables crops to survive, but not to thrive. They lack the nutritional content that they should have to become malnourished. They're unable to fight diseases or pests, so we poison the soil around them, killing the pests, but also the good micronutrients and fungi that are left in the soil, perpetuating the problem. Why is this important? Well, depleted, malnourished plants are unable to supply us with the nutrients that we need, so we become malnourished too. A lot of the crops are affected by this cycle, and they feed livestock, who in turn are malnourished. They're fattened on grain, which doesn't contain the nutrients that it needs either. We are actually creating a dead food pyramid. What can we do about it, though? Go ahead and switch to the next slide. Mushrooms are one way to rejuvenate the soil, and fungi is definitely needed to create water retention and biodiversity. Mushrooms are the fruiting body of fungi. There are lots of types of mushrooms, and not all of them are beneficial, but they're all good indicators of soil health. So if you have mushrooms in your garden, you know that this is actually a good sign, right? That your soil is healthy, that there's something for the mushrooms to eat, which would be carbon, sugar, right? They work in a symbiotic relationship with plant roots. The plant roots are blind. They go into the soil and they hope to reach what they need, but the plants produce a sugar that the fungi needs, and the fungi can help the roots see by spreading their structure out and getting more nutrients and water. They're also a great filter system and can be used to catch toxic runoff before it enters into the streams, and can even be a lucrative cover crop. Regenerative agriculture has been gaining popularity since the 1990s. Regenerative agriculture is a farming and ranching method that aims to improve the soil health and biodiversity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's a sustainable approach that uses fewer resources to produce more food. It contains 4 main components of cover crops and green manure, which is growing plants that are plowed under the soil. Crop rotation and diversification, conservation tillage or no-till farming, and composting and soil amendments. Okay, go ahead and switch to the next slide. Charles Massey is an Australian who wrote Call of the Reed Warbler when he was struck by the bird coming back after a long absence from the area. He had been doing this work on his own ranch and was spreading the word around, and to his neighbors who started on this path, he has this wonderful picture of a fence line that one side of it is desert and the other side of it has returned to the green. And when he was touring his neighbor's place, he heard the call of a reed warbler, and he was brought to tears with the understanding that this was a return to its home environment that it had been away from for a long time because of conventional farming and ranching techniques. This whole his whole adventure was started by a question by his grandson, who asked, "Grandpa, why do we have to kill things to grow things?" Go ahead and switch to the next slide. Gabe Brown is an American. He is a national speaker. He's an educator. He tells his story and teaches people how to grow and start out onto the regenerative agriculture path. Gabe talks less about land conservation and more about soil health to promote more money in the crops that he's talking to farmers, and he's talking about why they need to switch to this. And he's kind of honed in on this idea that farmers will listen if you tell them how they're going to make more money, right? As opposed to just this nature conservation idea. So he goes around and talks about this, talks about how farmers have been learning about yield, like more food rather than making more money on diverse food crops rather than feed crops. He started this journey. He came into this path not from a generations of farmers, but married into it. And he took over his father-in-law's farm and had 4 years in a row of crop failures until he was nearly bankrupt, and he couldn't borrow any more money from the banks for seeds or twine, even anything, right? So he was really kind of forced into this, and he's very humble, and he says, you know, that God, right, did this so that, or picked the stupidest person, right, to do this so that he would just stumble into this way of working with the land, right? And so he learned all these things. He did some research. He went back to look at, you know, how Thomas Edison did his land, and look to what these old ways of doing things were, which were, you know, so he's got a book now. So go ahead and change the slide for that. And his book is called, you have it on the slide here, Dirt to Soil, right? And so what's the difference between dirt and soil? Well, dirt is dead and soil is not, right? So he has 6 principles to create soil health. And this is context. Where are you located? What will the climate and the land support you growing? 2, limit the amount of disturbance, right? This is low till, no till. 3, armor the soil surface. Make sure that the soil surface is covered, right? So that moisture gets retained, so that the wind doesn't blow the soil away. So the carbon is caught. 4, build diversity, right? Lots of different plants. And he's got, if you look at his farm, he's got weeds, right? There are things all over the place, and the crops come up through that, and it's okay. They all feed off of each other. Looking at things like the three sisters, right? The corn, beans, and squash, and how those all work together. 5, keep living roots in the soil as long as possible. And this goes back to that idea of the green manure, just turning plants under, but keeping those living roots there. And 6, integrating animals. Now he's talking about livestock, but what can we do if we're not a farmer, right? So as I'm doing this research, all of these are talking about hundreds of acres of land and farmers. And of course, this is definitely an important thing because there's so much land. But what can we all do, right, in our own backyard? And we can, and he talks about how we can use these principles in our own gardens and backyards to regenerate our own soil. And every little bit helps, right? Every drop is a drop that fills the bucket. If we can create not these monoculture grass yards, right, that we are putting pesticides and chemicals into to make sure that it stays green, but instead introduce different plants, make sure that we don't necessarily break up all of the leaves, make sure that there are dead wood over the winter. All of these things, keep those living roots in the soil as long as possible. These are all things that we can do, right? Uh, as resistance, right, to the deadening food pyramid that we have. The animals that we can integrate into our own spaces, right? What animals do we have around? Well, he talks about bugs, right? Not all bugs are bad. And if you have beneficial bugs, they're going to keep at bay those non-beneficial bugs. So if we stop spraying pesticides on things, they'll equal out, right? We can even introduce plants that will attract beneficial bugs, or even the bugs themselves, right? Letting ladybugs in. Yeah, go ahead and switch the slide. So in short, we need to start thinking of the soil as living and caring for it as a part of the environment which grows food versus a stagnant thing that food is kept in. Let me say that again. We need to start thinking about soil as living and caring for it as part of the environment that grows food versus a stagnant thing that food is kept in or comes out of, right? So the nutrients that grows the food, this is all part of the same thing, the same environment or ecosystem. Go ahead and switch the slide again. We see a vast difference between a living, nutrition-dense, deep-rooted soil that holds water and a desert. As Charles Massey saw, we see bugs and animals and notice the role that they play, as Gabe Brown saw. Switch the slide again. Next slide, there you go. We see living soil again. Now, this slide talks about studies have found that farmers who plant wildflowers near their crops don't need to use pesticides as much. Wildflowers attract beneficial insects like ladybugs, lacewings, and parasitic wasps that feed on common crop pests like aphids and caterpillars and mites. So we know that we can do these kinds of things to bring to our places that diversity that will help increase the soil productivity, but not only that, its role in the ecosystem, right? We want the soil to be healthy. It helps to hold carbon from the air, and it produces nutrient-dense food. for all of us. Go ahead and switch the slide again. We see living soil again. All right, thank you. I think I want to point out in this slide, you can see the little white filaments that are coming out of from between her fingers. That's the fungi. That's those little white strands of fungi that help the plant roots find the nutrients that they need. And that's really important. And I didn't know that. I've seen those and I thought they were worms or something, but they are actually filament of fungi. And it's a really good indicator of good soil health, and keep that. That's a good sign for us. Okay. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Amy. So we'll go ahead and stop record.